asked to read some work, some from my work with this. The microphone's going to attack me a little bit, but to talk a little bit about place, very little bit, and read to you from some of the work that we have. But think about place, where we inhabit, and I inevitably start to think about the book of Genesis, chapter 1, verse 28. Be fruitful and multiply. Go out into the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the beasts of the field and the fowl of the air. That worked pretty well for a while. Made people behave pretty well, but it's not been such a good thing for the planet we live on, if you will. Although maybe I shouldn't say that on Sundays after people have come back from church. Abby warned me about that. But, what I would like to talk about and read from my book is something more of an intimate relationship to place. That's something that sort of shapes us in some ways. It has a way of helping to create our sense of identity, even down to the level of our own body in certain ways. And that kind of a relationship to place as opposed to something that's a neutral backdrop where human activities take place. And I want to start with a little poem from this chapbook of poems, Other Stones, Kinder Temples, that came out about a year ago. Haven. Turn the key made of water and the lock made of moss. That's me, you hear chuckling, my escape already transacted. Not from, but to here. Haven, not prison. Weight me down with limestone in the deeper pools of the upslope headwaters, that's me. Grinning like a brook trout, safe and hungry, feeding in the back eddy. Shut me in behind a door of karst. Wall me in with hemlock and poplar, that's me. Smirking among the trees, a sly shadow in the dimming light that drips down to the stream and the ravine from the hills rising at my back. Come and get me, and I dare you. Well, I want to read you some things from my novel, Safety of Deeper Water, that came out earlier this year from West Virginia. And real quickly, the basic plot of the novel, I'm not going to give it all away, I want you to buy a copy and such. But the main character, Sandy Holston, is a 30-something-year-old nurse whose husband has been incarcerated for manslaughter. He's got a bit of a temper. And during his time in prison, he plans a failed prison escape that she's implicated in. And that leads, one thing to another. Hijinks ensue, and it fails, of course. And for one reason or another, Sandy is led to move from where she had been living with this husband who's in prison to a new place that's shaped by a new love for the place in which she lived. A love that's based on the mountains, the streams, the fish in the waters, not that kind of political sense of place, state boundaries and names, but rather a sense of place that's more shaped by mountains, hillsides, watersheds, things such as that. And so anyways, we first meet her early in the novel. And a little paragraph I want to read to you, where she's going to visit her husband in prison, which sort of sets the tone of the idea of place in the novel. Every Sunday for 6 months now, she had made the 30-mile drive to Bland County for visiting day. She felt a guilty gratitude for his place of incarceration being conveniently located so close to home. A pleasant drive through ancient mountains and valleys to see him. She would have enjoyed the drive whether to visit him or not, and somehow it fit. Seemed appropriate that he would do his time here in the county of his birth, only a few miles from where he had grown up, so close to the streams he had fished as a boy. On her first Sunday visit, he had told her that as a child, whenever he passed the prison, he had shivered with the fear that one day he would be forced to live behind the tall cyclone fencing, under the spools of razor wire, the searchlights, the guard towers. Now, here he sat, come full circle. Hell of a homecoming, he had said. Now, at that point, various other things occur, but in this sense, Sandy, the main character, Sandy Holston, is really at that point has kind of a neutral relationship to place. It's still something that's understood in very general terms. But as she moves into this new place, a new sense of belonging and connection begins to develop. And it's one of these places like where I live. The novel is kind of stitched together with places where I live in southwestern Virginia. But she moves into, again, a kind of a very rural area along a river, And one of these houses that you see around here, these little like sort of vinyl rectangles, got a pile of tires out in the backyard. And so if you spend time in this area, you know the kinds of places. And where she inherits a dog who lived there before and whose favorite activity is to kill skunks. And that will show up from time to time in the novel. But anyways, here's a picture of the protagonist of the novel, Sandy, with this different sense of place, a sense that it somehow is what creates identity. It's beyond plot and action. It is something that begins to shape you as a person. Sandy stands in the only place she could want to be on her first free day in a week, knee-deep in an Appalachian trout stream. The bow in her rod relaxes as she draws to hand and releases a modest brook trout. From the knees down, she feels the chill of the mountain water wick through her waders. Above the knees, the late spring sun weaving through hemlocks and sycamores warms her as she reels in her line and slips from the water onto a streamside rock. Before moving here, Sandy had fished most often in the tailwater of the Ripon River, below the dam, where the trout were larger, trickier, and the product of successful fisheries management. Today, she decided she should begin to learn the waters of the upstream Ripon, above the reservoir, within the national forest, begin to learn the cascading, gradient stream flowing within natural banks and the wild native brook trout that had finned these waters for centuries. Her buttocks settle upon the rock, and its heat softens the flesh within the waders. Booted feet remain to the ankles in the cold stream, and she relishes the split sensations in her body, sensing no contradictions or conflict. Her eyes follow the twisting band of water up the hillside until it disappears behind the next tier of boulders. She imagines the Ripon at its source, an underground spring issuing from the ground near the spine of Rogers Ridge, winding down its slopes, picking up strength and volume from a dozen feeder streams along the way until it merges with Hogback Branch and drops into a gorge of its own making to flow several miles down to where Sandy sits on a warm rock in a spot of sun. Never before has she fished this far upstream, but as the small river rushes down to where Sandy's boots slice the current, she feels as if she has in some way always been in this one spot at this one time. New but old, ancient. An emigre in a strange landscape, yet utterly at home, indigenous. She imagines in an instant a million variations on this moment, this place. She feels like a shining new and wild child, pushed raw from a rock, elegantly born into a venerable place, this place for which she was intended all along.